Back on Stadium, back on YouTube, Foul Territory running. We have a poll running as well, and we bring in our insider, Ken Rosenthal, right now. And we'll start off with the poll, too. So, Ken, we're currently running the following question. Teams you've written about a lot, but for the wrong reasons. Which underperforming team should definitely sell at the trade deadline? Mets, Cardinals, Padres, other. Your thoughts?
I would go Cardinals right now. I just don't see the Mets or Padres doing it. They've invested too much in their seasons. They're going to try to get back in this thing. But if the Cardinals do not get going, and they've played a little bit better of late, in fairness, 5 of 7 now, then you have some interesting pieces. You have Jordan Montgomery, who has pitched very well. Jack Flaherty, a physical question at the moment. Jordan Hicks, who has had a resurgence as the closer. Those are all potential free agents. They're going to walk, potentially. So that is the team I would focus on the most right now because they have seemingly the toughest road back, not necessarily from a divisional standpoint because they're in the weakest division, but just games to 500 and the fact that they have not played well at all.
Okay, so I want to dive into the article that you wrote on The Athletic about St. Louis, and it was very in-depth. I have a few questions for you. So let's start with big picture to just double down on what you said. When you say sell, is Goldschmidt involved because there's only a year left? Of course, we know the guys coming up that are going to be free agents after the season. If you're selling, that's a no-brainer. Right. Jordan Montgomery, Jordan Hicks, Jack Flaherty. But how far would you go if you're the Cardinals and you're like 10 games back in the next couple weeks?
Well, what I wrote, Scott, is that they have generally taken a conservative course. They don't spend a whole lot of money. They don't do dramatic things at the deadline. They've made some big moves over the years. Arenado certainly was one. Goldschmidt was another. But the point of what I wrote is saying that their current strategy doesn't seem to be working. They've taken this conservative course and look where they are, in last place in the National League Central. So basically the point was they should splurge in free agency, which is something they haven't done traditionally. Their biggest free agent contracts, Matt Holliday, it's going back over a decade, $120 million, or tear it down and surround your young position players with more and get more pitching and do some things along those lines. Now, I made it clear in the story that I don't expect the Cardinals to pursue either course, but Goldschmidt is a really interesting guy. Here is a player who is one of the best at his position, one of the best in the game. As you said, Scott, he's a free agent after next season. So, okay, he's got value for 2 pennant races. And also, you might be a Cardinals fan thinking, well, I want Paul Goldschmidt to stay. Okay, but he's going to be 37 at the start of that next contract. And not even Paul Goldschmidt's going to be really good forever. So, in my view, it's something they should look at. Now, if you trade Goldschmidt, you might as well trade Arenado too, because the thing becomes a situation where it's a little bit of a rebuild. And Arenado didn't want to be part of a Colorado team that wouldn't build around him. I don't know that he would want to be part of a Cardinal team that would build around him. So, this is all theoretical and all just talking. And the one problem with everything I just described is this team draws $3 million a year when things are normal, not COVID. You draw $3 million a year to give up on a season is awfully difficult. You're basically telling all those fans who bought tickets for the rest of the year, sorry, we're not really trying the rest of the year. We're rebuilding. Maybe a certain segment of the fan base would welcome that. At the same time, it's just a tough sell.
Is getting rid of Goldschmidt selling? I mean, I know he's the reigning MVP, but what if you couple it with a team that has a starting pitcher to add to their mediocre starting pitching staff? And then all of a sudden, maybe they're, yes, they're taking away Goldschmidt, but they're adding to a huge weakness, which might, really lift the whole team up.
Eric, that's a great question. And I think we've discussed this before, but I'll bring it up again. The notion of pure buyer or pure seller is something that guys like me and everyone in the media and fans too overstate. Teams generally are doing both at once, right? They're always trying to get better. So, sure, it's possible you trade Paul Goldschmidt for a starter with maybe 2 years of control, whatever it might be, and you get some prospects too, and you go about it that way. You're kind of retooling on the fly, just putting your assets in a different kind of order. That would be perhaps the way they should go, given what I just said, the attendance that they annually have. I just don't know that that pitcher is going to be available. But for Paul Goldschmidt, I don't know, Eric. You're right. He might be.
Ken, you and I both know I played for the Cardinals. You covered the Cardinals forever. They don't do this. They don't blow
I
it up
know.
and start over. They don't. So I find it hilarious to me that we're even talking about this because they're the middle of the pack team that just expects fans to show, kind of like the Cubs for years. We'll be good. We might make the playoffs. We'll win. Now they used to try to win more, but they're like, we're banking, bank, baby. Ballpark Village, 3 million fans in Bush. They don't. They don't make the moves. They don't make the bold moves. Yes, they traded for Goldschmidt. Yes, they traded for Arenado. I get all of that, but they never go out and sign a guy, and they also never blow it up to a point where they would look at their fans and say, "Oh, we're going to start over." Because St. Louis fans would be like, "Why? We support you. You make money." So to me, this is. I'm glad we're talking about it, but this ain't happening.
No, AJ, you make a great point. And I said in the article, I don't expect either of these strategies to be the one the Cardinals take this deadline or even beyond. At the same time, if there comes a point when people are no longer coming, and I don't know that point will ever be reached in St. Louis, or there comes a point where the frustration just becomes that much greater, then you have a different equation, right? Because you're not making all that money. And it's difficult with the Cardinals, too. I mentioned this in the article. John Mozeliak is getting a lot of heat right now, understandably. At the same time, he's kind of like Brian Cashman with the Yankees. Brian Cashman gets a lot of heat. Brian Cashman has had 25 straight winning seasons. They've been to the playoffs, I believe, every year but 3 during his tenure. Mozeliak has a similar record of success. He's been around running that team since 2007. They've been to a couple of World Series, won one. They're generally in the playoff picture. They had a little bit of a dry spell 2016 to 18, but they've been good. They haven't gotten too far lately, but it's hard to argue with what they've done overall, bigger picture, years and years. That said, this has got to be frustrating for them, and it's new for them, and they don't know necessarily what to do because they haven't been in this position before. The next few weeks will probably give them some direction.
Ken, first of all, stop standing up for your fellow bow tie wearer, Mozeliak. Okay, let's talk about him in real terms now, since yes, he is taking a lot of heat because he built the team. And
correct.
And he didn't get the starting pitching they needed. He didn't make some. If you look at their team, we've gone into this a million times. They have all the same players. Their outfielders are like the same guys. Take out Newport, throw Carlson in, same guy, right? Other than O'Neill, who's different. They apparently just want to get rid of him at this point. And then you have Adam Wainwright. They brought him back, and we love Waino. I love Waino. He deleted his Twitter because he was getting wrecked on there. So you know things are bad in St. Louis if they're going after a franchise icon like Adam Wainwright.
I agree, but they're still showing up. And that is the challenge of trying to rebuild when you have that situation. And AJ, you mentioned it. They never do this. They never have had to do it. And to me, though, they're a great team at developing. They get these players. Now, granted, you're right. There are a number of similar types in their outfield. They don't have any great young pitching right now in the big leagues. Maybe Liberatore becomes that guy. Maybe some of the kids in the minor leagues help become those guys too. But at the same time, this is a team that generally is competitive and generally just churns out player after player. If you retooled, kind of like the Yankees did the year they traded Chapman, you bring in some other guys and you go forward, maybe that's the way to go about it. And again, I'm not suggesting, one more time I'll say this, that they're going to do either one of these things. But I believe the last line of the story was, it's time for some better solutions. It is time for some better solutions. What they're doing, at least this year, and you might want to dismiss this year as an aberration if you're John Mozeliak. Maybe that's fair. But this year, it's not working.
Before we move on, Ken, do you have any advice for Adam Wainwright as somebody who deals with tons of Twitter trolls on a daily basis? I mean, even we talked about the topic yesterday. I think one of the comments was, I'm not going to listen to guys that don't have their hat on correctly. And it sounded serious. And I'm just like, you are the problem.
You know what, Scott? I don't have any advice for Adam, but I will say this. If I didn't have to be on Twitter for my job, I probably would not be on Twitter. I don't see any real constructive reason to be on Twitter. Adam has used it to promote some of his charitable ventures. He has done it for a little bit along those lines, but at the same time, if I'm a player, I want no part of this because it's not a rational world. You're not hearing from people who can offer constructive criticism. You know, as a player, when you're failing and when you're succeeding. You don't need some yo-yo with an egg, next to his name telling you that. So that's my advice. I would stay off it.
Just like P. Diddy said, more money, more problems. More followers, more problems. Tell him, Ken. We ain't got 1.5 million followers. You got all the problems in the world.
And it's not just that. It's every time I write an article, we have comments under the article in The Athletic. And that's another area where people can vent. But that's fine. Hey, for me, it's all part of it. And people have a right to say whatever they want. And occasionally they make good points, and that's good. But I don't look at the mentions too often, and I don't take the comments too seriously, because if you did all that, you'd drive yourself nuts.
Hey, Eric, hold on. Eric, P. Diddy said that, but have you heard what Drake says now? More money, more problems. Bring on the problems. Bring on the problems.
That's what I don't have.
You can buy things to fix those problems, so bring on the problems.
Yeah, it's called blinders. Just don't look at your mentions ever. Just send out a tweet if you want. If you want to say something funny or something about your charity, and never ever click the mentions. Maybe use the money to have somebody as an assistant block your mentions so you can't even check them if you wanted to. That's the best way to do it. Like famous music artists with 20 million followers on Twitter or Instagram, they just will never check what fans say. Or at least
it's never
allegedly
constructive for them. It's not going to help them in any way. Now, I will say this. I'll admit this, that with the comments under the articles, occasionally they'll catch a mistake that I might have made, a factual thing that slipped through the editor. Things happen. We're not perfect. And then I'll make an adjustment. And that's the one use I have of it. But a lot of times, too, I'll write a 3,000-word article and someone will nitpick some word choice. And it's like, whoa.
Hey, they read it.
They did read it. They did.
That's true.
Yeah. We appreciate the good people out there, the fans. So let's go to Steve Cohen, who's all over Twitter and sends out a tweet that he's going to have a big press conference and tell it like it is. So what do you think is going through his mind? And did you take anything from Billy Epler's comments, essentially backing Buck Showalter and sounding like they're just going to keep chugging along? They're not blowing this up yet.
Well, New York is a different media market, as we all know. And there has been a lot of heat of late because the Mets have underperformed to an extreme extent. People are asking questions in the media. Fans are asking questions, wondering, is anyone going to pay the price for all this? Because in baseball, as we know, that often happens. Billy Epler yesterday sought to kind of calm the flames a little bit, and he did. He basically said, we're not going to fire anybody. Buck Showalter is the guy we believe should lead us out of this. The coaches are working hard. We believe in them as well. That, to me, was the prelude to the Cohen news conference today, and I expect Cohen to basically express frustration and express his willingness to get the team to a better place at the deadline, but I don't expect him to come out and say Buck Showalter is fired after his general manager yesterday said nothing like that is going to happen. So it's going to be a case where he takes questions, and that's great, by the way. How many owners do not get out front and take responsibility and accountability for their club? But at the same time, I'm not expecting anything seismic out of that news conference.
What would be something seismic? What would be something that you would say, wow, I am so impressed that Cohen, hey, he's on the podium. That's a huge thing, which I think all owners should have a mandatory 2 appearances per season. But hey, whatever, that's never going to happen. What would be seismic? What would be a seismic thing from Steve Cohen that everyone goes, whoa, and I don't know whether it propels the Mets or not, is irrelevant.
A seismic thing would be threatening a job or firing somebody. That's the obvious thing that would be most seismic. The other seismic thing that's been talked about with the Mets, more theoretically than anything, almost like the conversation we were having with the Cardinals about my article and all of that, is the idea of the Mets as sellers. I don't see that happening, but perhaps Cohen could shed some light on his thought process, because they made an interesting trade over the weekend. They traded Eduardo Escobar. Not such a big deal, right? Brett Beatty's usurped his playing time. They have other guys as well. But what they did was picked up his entire remaining salary, and they did that to get a prospect. In theory, because Cohen's got all this crazy amount of money, he could do that as well with some of his higher price players, pick up their salaries, get better prospects, and kind of retool that way. Do I expect it to happen? Is it easy to make happen? No, in both cases, but that would be seismic. If he admitted that he's looking at selling in that fashion.
No, you know what would be seismic, Ken? He fires Billy Epler after the press conference he had. That would be seismic, and that would be such a pimp move. Be like, oh yeah, Billy. By the way, what you said, it don't matter. You're out. Now on to
That would be
Ohtani.
seismic.
That would be
No,
awesome.
you're correct.
Hey, that would be the Steinbrenner move.
Oh,
You want to
but
be
then
the
he- but then he
Steinbrenner in New
rehired
York?
him. Yeah.
You just put your
But
fist
that's a
down
great
and
point,
say,
Scott.
screw it.
He's taken pains so far in his public comments to Joel Sherman of the New York Post that he's not going to be Steinbrenner, that he's going to be patient, that he's going to trust his people. We'll see how long that lasts. Certainly, this team has played, and I wrote this after the Atlanta series when they got hammered down in Atlanta. They are playing like a team that is going to cost people jobs, and ultimately, they might cost people jobs. But when it comes to firing a general manager right before the draft, right before the trade deadline, not such a smart thing to do. And when it comes to firing a manager, that's all well and good, but you've got to have a replacement lined up, and there really is no one on that staff that I would think could take over right away and get something out of this team that Buck Showalter isn't. Now, I said that last year about Girardi, and look at Rob Thompson. He did an amazing job getting more out of the Phillies than Girardi was getting out of that team. But I'm not so sure there is anyone on the Mets staff. Joey Cora, good candidate. Eric Chavez, a future candidate. Glenn Sherlock's been around forever. But I'm not sure you fire Buck for any of those guys.
Let's move to Ohtani. So again, last night, ridiculous. And I think you're trying to change the national or international narrative of forget trade. We were even getting rid of that if they were kind of close to contention. They're definitely in contention for a playoff spot. And it looks like that's not going to change by the time the trade deadline passes. So what's next? Are you trying to think about how this team could look as a contender and coming off a week where they made 2 deals to boost their infield after suffering injuries that look good and bring more veterans and good dudes, Eduardo Escobar and Mike Moustakas, to the ball club?
Scott, it's interesting. We've been talking forever about the possibility of a trade of Ohtani. But with a team at this time of year especially, and also around the winter meetings and that kind of thing, but especially now because you can see more happening in front of you, you have to follow what a team is doing to understand their actions. And what I mean by that is go look at the Angels going back to last offseason. What did they do? They signed Tyler Anderson, brought in Hunter Renfroe, Brandon Drury, Gio Urshela, Matt Moore, Carlos Estevez. Big year in terms of acquiring guys. What did they do this season? They promoted from the 2022 draft Zach Neto and Ben Joyce. Then they promoted their first-round pick from the 2021 draft as well. They are acting, and these 2 trades last weekend reflected that, like a team that feels in an urgent position. That's who they are right now. So, do I expect them to continue acting that way? I absolutely do. Now, depends on what's available. Can they really improve their team? All of that, injuries, everything that's going on when the deadline approaches. But this team right now holds a wild card position. They're not giving up by trading Ohtani. They're trying to add to Ohtani. They've been trying to add to Ohtani since the offseason. And really, we all need to change our whole perspective on what they're doing. And when I wrote today in our Athletic Daily newsletter, which is free, by the way, that if this team gets in, and I'm not sure they will get in, of course, but if they do get in, they're kind of interesting, kind of dangerous. They've got Ohtani. Reed Detmers has figured it out. Sandoval, I believe, will get it back. Pretty interesting starting 3 right there. You've got a bullpen that has performed fairly well. You've got the 6th best offense in terms of runs per game in the major leagues. They could be one of these teams that gets on a run if they get in.
If they get in, who's the set? I mean, I know you said Detmers and they have Sandoval. Are they going Ohtani and then an opener? And Ohtani's only pitching on 6 days rest, so that really cuts down in the playoffs. So it almost is like they need a 3-pitcher depth. Is Detmers enough, or is a Giolito a guy that's going to put him over?
I would expect they would want another, of course. All teams are going to be looking for that, but not going to be easy to find. Just what I'm saying there, Eric, is Ohtani Detmers or Ohtani Sandoval Detmers, that is a pretty good place to start. And granted, yes, in a playoff series, you need to space them out more because of the way Ohtani is used. I understand all that. But I sort of like what they're doing. I've liked what they've been doing since the offseason. Just the aggressiveness that they've shown under Perry Minasian. And it seems to me that it wouldn't necessarily be the 2022 Phillies marching from the wild card all the way to the end, just about. But they could be an interesting team come October if they get in.
Can't we leeway the last thing we were talking about to this team? Could Art Moreno say, okay, I'll take on some of Verlander's contract if you're willing to give him up, or Scherzer's contract if Cohen comes out today and says we're looking to break some of it down but not completely tear it down, because you can't tear their whole team down.
That's a great question, Eric. And in those two trades over the weekend, they did not add payroll. As I said, the Mets picked up all of Escobar. Moustakas is already making the minimum salary, or not making, he is getting the minimum salary from the team that has him because the Reds are paying everything else after releasing him. So these two trades were easy, right? They just had to give up players. And maybe you give up a better young player when you're, of course, getting this money in return. And that could be the case again come the deadline. But if Moreno is willing to add payroll, then you give up less. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch with the Angels for sure.
Do you agree that they should say, screw everything after this year right now and let's focus on the present more than any other ball club? Like, I think about comments I saw this morning from Dana Brown, GM of the Astros, saying essentially they're going to be active, but there hasn't been much conversation, true, because most teams are still in it. They're not going to go nuts to give up a huge prospect just for a rental. And I'm thinking in my head, the Angels should, because if everyone's going to cost more because there's less available, supply and demand, the Angels should just say, screw it. It's not like they have the best farm system anyway, but my point is, if it takes the top 3 to 5 prospects in their system to get the top players at the trade deadline, shouldn't this team do it? Because this could be their final run with Ohtani, and even if it's not, they have to impress him.
Scott, there's no doubt they're in a unique position because of all you just described. And not only is it their final run with Ohtani, if they're going to have any chance of convincing him to stay, they have to win, and they have to show him that this could be possible, that in Anaheim, it's not kind of thing where we're just going to lose forever, right? But the problem with that is if you're Ohtani, and Ohtani's smart, he'll see if they trade all their top prospects, he'll say, well, what does that mean for the future? If I'm signing for 10 years, what are we looking like in 3 or 4 without any top prospects? So they're in a unique spot. There's no doubt about it. There is more urgency to their situation. Haven't made the playoffs since 14. Haven't won a playoff game since 09. You've got Ohtani in the last year of his contract. You've got Trout in his prime. Maybe not having his best year, but ultimately you expect him to be right there, as he always is. So yes, they have to be as creative as they possibly can be. Not necessarily mortgaging their entire future, but getting things done for sure.
I'm glad you got all of this in, because unfortunately, I don't think you're going to have much time over the weekend to chat.
Oh, I understand that. I understand that. I'm working with AJ Przinsky on Fox, and when that happens, sometimes I've got to just take a back seat.
I'm making you buy me dinner Friday night, and then I'm just following you back to the hotel on Saturday night. And I'm just, wherever you go, if it's room service, I'm going to be sitting right next to you, and I'm going to say, put that on Ken for the first time ever.
Well, we've been through this before. I do.
And no expenses. And no expenses.
I owe AJ by his count about 8 dinners for all of the help he gave me professionally when he was playing. So at some point, I do have to repay. I acknowledge that.
Ken, is AJ Veruca Salt? Do you remember the movie? Remember the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Is he Veruca Salt?
Was the fat one, right?
Yeah, who was like, I want this, and I want that, and I want this.
Nah, he's not that. I mean, I do owe him a few dinners. There's no doubt about it. There's no disputing that. I'll grant that.
The only thing Ken asks for is airtime. Lots of airtime.
Yeah, well, he'll buy you dinner if you give him airtime. That's the trade-off. Otherwise,
we can switch spots on Saturday.
No, that's pushing it. That's pushing it.
That is pushing it for both of us.
Yes. Have fun. Thank you. Can't wait to watch the game.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. And check out Fair Territory. It is up there on anywhere you get your podcasts, YouTube as well. Of course, episodes drop every single Monday, 30 minutes of glory, all the good stuff from Ken without being interrupted by AJ.